This is a CBS News special report. I'm Adriana Diaz in New York. President Donald Trump has just landed in Beijing for a two-day summit. He will meet with President Xi Jinping and other officials. The U.S. war with Iran will be high on the agenda as well, but business is also on the docket at a time when many Americans are struggling with affordability. The president posted that he will ask Xi to, quote, open up China to U.S. companies. Weijia Jiang is in Beijing covering the president's visit. Weijia, good morning. Tell us what's on the agenda for this summit.
Good morning, Adriana. Good morning to everybody. We were watching as the Chinese were literally just rolling out the red carpet for President Trump. He is expected to be greeted by a Chinese delegation led by the vice president of China, along with a Marine band and honor guard and several Chinese youth to really pump up the energy for the president before he has an official welcome ceremony tomorrow with his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping. Now, these two men have a lot to talk about when it comes to the trade deals and business deals that President Trump is hoping for. Of course, the backdrop of all this, as you mentioned, is the war in Iran, as China is the biggest purchaser of Iranian oil. So we expect that to come up, along with China's aggression toward Taiwan. But no real significant movement on those two fronts, Adriana, even though obviously they will be talking about it. But this trip is really to show that even though there is fierce competition between these two biggest economies in the world, there is also stability and a working relationship. So there will be a lot of business mixed in with ceremony and pleasure between these two leaders who last met in October. And by the way, this is the first time a U.S. sitting president will be visiting China in nearly a decade. Of course, that was also President Trump the last to do that back in 2017. Adriana?
And so much has changed since 2017, since that last visit to Beijing. China has become more economically self-sufficient, more militarily aggressive. Weijia, I saw that you were out in Beijing speaking to local Chinese people about this summit. What did they tell you?
You know, what's really interesting is that many people on the street who we approached didn't even know that President Trump was coming here, and others sort of brushed it off as no big deal because, to your point, there is a different understanding of the relationship between China and the U.S. now compared to even just a decade ago because of all the advancements in different areas. And so when we were talking to people, there were certainly plenty who spoke about the importance of this summit to try to maintain that stability and prevent any escalation of competition turning into confrontation. But again, there was a lot of ignorance about the president of the United States coming here. And so the eyes of the world, though, however, will certainly be on this very critical relationship.
And our eyes are on that plane door as we await President Trump coming down. We're going to bring in CBS News national security contributor Samantha Vinograd. Sam, thank you so much for joining us. So you helped plan the summit between President Obama and President Xi in 2013. What do you think is President Trump's mindset, his strategy going into this summit?
Well, I can't speak to Trump's mindset other than wanting to project an image of stability with the People's Republic of China. But what I can tell you is this, Adriana, we are now in the performance phase of the process. There are months of planning that go into these kinds of summits to include trying to prioritize exactly what topics to put on the agenda. There's such a long list. At the same time, historically, both countries would have conducted significant intelligence work to try to identify what the other side really wanted, what the other side's strategy was, and what their non-negotiables were as well. Historically, working-level meetings would have preceded this summit to try to ensure that the president himself is not the deal maker, but rather the deal closer. We have seen Secretary Bessent, for example, engage in those kinds of meetings. So at this time, what we can anticipate is that President Trump signals globally that he and President Xi have a stable relationship. He is certainly focused on ensuring that the business delegation that is accompanying him does get something out of this summit. And then more broadly, of course, that he has some accomplishments on trade, particularly when it comes to U.S. agricultural exports. So a lot to do, but certainly months of work leading up to this moment.
So you just laid out what President Trump is hoping to get out of this. What will President Xi want to get out of this? And how does Iran play into the calculation?
Certainly, President Xi is focused on a stable economic relationship with the United States as well. He has been quite focused on ensuring that the United States relaxes some of the U.S.'s export controls on key technologies to China, including certain chips, as well as components for semiconductors. He is also very focused on getting the U.S. administration to have some sort of public pivot on U.S. policy toward Taiwan, and perhaps signaling an openness to reunification between mainland China and Taiwan. So those are likely topping President Xi's agenda with President Trump, Adriana.
And Sam, what levers do both sides have to try to get the other to their goal?
President Xi is certainly aware of the economic crisis that is impacting this country. Certainly moments before President Trump took off for China yesterday, he was asked about the economic impact of the war in Iran on the United States, which he brushed off. The People's Republic of China was certainly paying attention to those comments, to inflation numbers and more. And so China will try to exert its economic leverage over the United States, its chokehold on critical minerals and rare earths that are so fundamental to so many parts of Americans' lives. And of course, China will try to position itself as a mediator vis-a-vis Iran because of its close economic relationship, as well as its export of certain technologies to the Iranian regime that are critical to the Iranian military complex.
Sam, are these technologies that are being used militarily by Iran against the U.S.?
China has been accused of exporting what are called dual-use technologies to the Iranian regime and, importantly, Adriana, to Russia for its war in Ukraine. Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent accused China of being the largest state sponsor of terrorism because of its support for the Iranian regime. And so we should expect there to be a deep consternation within the U.S. national security complex about China's export of these dual-use technologies, drone parts and more, to not just the Iranian regime, but to the Russian government as well.
And let's bring Weijia Jiang back in from Beijing. Weijia, you know, obviously there are economic pressures right now on the U.S. given the price of oil, but China has also been struggling economically. How will that play into this? And what will it take, if anything, for China to use its power that it has, its influence over Iran, being the largest purchaser of Iranian oil, to try to end this war?
Right. Adriana, I think both of these leaders understand that they need each other when it comes to their economies. They are so intertwined that it is in the best interest for both Presidents Xi and Trump to maintain this stability and to open up the doors for each other rather than closing them. But of course, it is a lot more complicated to do that. However, if it's any indication what President Trump is eyeing, just look at the entourage that he is bringing with him here to Beijing. We know that there are several CEOs from America expected to join him. In fact, aboard Air Force One, Elon Musk flew with him, along with the CEO of NVIDIA, Jensen Huang. Tim Cook of Apple is also expected to be here. It's quite a long list because the president wants to signal just how important it is for this China-U.S. relationship to bloom even more as it relates to American businesses. And so that is clearly what the president is eyeing. Xi Jinping is well aware of that. And we do expect some big deals to be announced by the end of this visit. More purchasing of American soybeans, perhaps Boeing jets, which is a huge priority for the president, and American beef. And you're right that the backdrop of all of this is so critical because China does hold a card here. They are the biggest purchaser of Iranian oil, which is helping Tehran stay economically afloat. But to Sam's point earlier, the president explicitly said before coming here that he doesn't think he needs any help when it comes to mediating an off-ramp with Iran. And so that conversation will be quite interesting, Adriana, if the president doesn't explicitly ask Xi to reduce the purchasing of oil.
Important context there from our Weijia Jiang on the ground in Beijing as we await the president for him to descend the steps there at the airport. Just to recap, President Trump has just landed in Beijing for a high-stakes summit with China and Chinese President Xi Jinping. Our coverage continues on CBS Mornings, your local news, and on our 24-hour streaming channel, CBS News 24/7. Tonight, Tony DeCopel will anchor the CBS Evening News from Taiwan. Many of you will return now to CBS Mornings. This has been a CBS News special report. I'm Adriana Diaz in New York.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Errol Barnett at the CBS Broadcast Center here in New York. President Trump, as you just saw there, touched down in Beijing ahead of his highly anticipated meeting with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. And we are standing by for President Trump to deplane and to witness the elaborate welcoming ceremony that has been organized there to welcome him. CBS News foreign correspondent Anna Corin is in Beijing watching all of this with us. Anna, we are waiting for the president to step down and be welcomed. Can you tell us anything about this welcoming ceremony and what else President Trump will be welcomed with there tonight?
We know that a Chinese delegation is there on the tarmac waiting to greet the president along with a band. I think we can see him now, Errol, stepping off Air Force One. No doubt he is being greeted to cheers and warmly welcomed too. This is a huge moment for President Trump. He has been wanting to come to Beijing now for months. Obviously, the Iran war back in March, he had to postpone that trip, hoping that that would be wrapped up by the time that he arrived in Beijing to have meetings with President Xi. But as we know, it is following him. And whilst he said before he departed Washington that he doesn't necessarily need China's help, we know that Xi Jinping will no doubt be having extensive conversations with him about Iran because it has caused global instability. So, Errol, we are looking at these live pictures of the president as he disembarks from Air Force One. He's being greeted by members, no doubt, of the U.S. Embassy, no doubt the U.S. ambassador, and we are trying to get word as to the Chinese delegation there greeting him, but perhaps you might want to listen in.
We don't have any close-up sound of the president, although we can hear the aircraft. We see the so-called beast in the foreground, the fortified limousine that transports the president. We see him there being welcomed by local officials, the Marine Band, an honor guard, Chinese youth as well. The president's son behind him. We can also see Elon Musk as part of the team that arrived. There does appear to be some chanting. Let's see if we can make out what they're saying. So, Anna, President Trump taking a moment here to just take it all in. What does this moment mean for Beijing?
Well, for President Xi, we know that he too has been waiting for this moment, Errol. You know, China's economy, it is not as powerful, perhaps, as it sometimes projects. It's not without its problems. So this summit is just as important, an injection in the arm. So President Xi, he is wanting a reduction on tariffs. He is wanting export restrictions on advanced semiconductors to be lifted, as well as sanctions on Chinese entities. This is certainly on his wish list, as is Taiwan. I know we've discussed this at length, Errol, but this is the core of core national interests as far as Xi Jinping is concerned and as far as China is concerned. It has been this way now for decades. But President Xi, he has spoken of reunification, that it is unstoppable. I was recently in Taiwan. I met with the deputy foreign minister, and there is genuine concern that President Trump could potentially, compromise Taiwan, change the U.S. position, change the language of the U.S. posture when it comes to Taiwan. But perhaps that is something to be discussed over the course of many many meetings. We know that this is the first, Errol, of perhaps 4 meetings this year between the two leaders. If this summit goes well, President Xi Jinping is expected to travel to Washington, D.C. After the summer. We then have APEC in Shenzhen, back here in China, which the two leaders will both attend later in the year, and then the G20 in Miami. So there will be plenty of opportunity, hopefully, for a reset in relations, for both sides to stabilise this relationship, which we know has been under enormous tension and turmoil, really, now for many years. So President Trump and President Xi both hoping that this will be a productive summit and win-win for both sides, Errol.
Anna Corin is our foreign correspondent there in Beijing, speaking over these live pictures coming to us from the tarmac there. You're looking at a silhouette of President Donald Trump inside the Beast after a red carpet welcome and an arrival ceremony there with Chinese youth waving the American and Chinese flag. Moments ago, we saw the delegation with the president move to their vehicles, including Elon Musk, NVIDIA's CEO, Jensen Huang, and Eric Trump, the president's son, and his wife, Lara Trump. Ramy Inocencio is standing by in London, watching all of this as well. So there's the pomp and circumstance, Ramy, and there's more to come during tomorrow's meeting between President Trump and Xi Jinping. What are the other major issues that the two will discuss, specifically as it relates to Iran, global energy prices, and trade?
Yeah, absolutely. And just looking at the pomp and circumstance happening right now, it already is very much a change in the optics of things from nearly a decade ago when President Trump was first there. There was far more pomp and circumstance then. There was a parade along the Avenue of Eternal Peace. The Forbidden City was closed down for President Trump and First Lady Melania. They had a meal there. It doesn't appear that something like that on that scale is going to happen this time, and it does mean more business, potentially more of a projection of China's confidence coming into this 10 years later. High on the agenda will be, of course, the economy. We've always been saying it's been a number one, number two kind of thing, the U.S. still being the world's number one economy, but China continuing to claw up there as the world's number two. And President Trump, over this past year, he has come back into office swinging. We all remember those Liberation Day tariffs, right? And he slapped major tariffs on Chinese goods, and then we remember that China fired back, and that just kept spiraling until both sides had tariffs of over 100%, which was the highest ever between two countries. Now that has been walked back, in part because the Supreme Court knocked that down, saying it was illegal. But there is this kind of truce in place going until November of this year, right after the midterms. Right now, there's a baseline 10% tariffs on both sides' goods. So Trump is in Beijing right now to talk about trade, having started a trade war, then having lost it, calling it illegal in the United States, but then again trying to bring home some deals for the United States, as we've been hearing from Weijia and from Anna. One of the big things, he might agree to loosen restrictions on exports of AI chips to China. And as we've been talking over the course of this hour, Iran absolutely looms large for President Trump potentially leaning on Beijing, leaning on Xi Jinping to stop somehow the import of Iranian oil. So all this to be done in the next days ahead as we carry on watching this pomp and circumstance and ceremony 10 years finally after President Trump was last there in the country.
That's right. Ramy Inocencio giving us that summary from our London bureau. Ramy, thank you very much. Professor Jacques Delisle is still with us. He was watching all of this. Remember, he's a professor of law and political science and the director of the Center for the Study of Contemporary China at the University of Pennsylvania. So that was pleasant, a smooth arrival, red carpet, a little bit of pomp and circumstance. But as Ramy just mentioned, it was much more elaborate last time around. What do you make of what we just saw?
Well, I would agree with what Remy said, which is that China's in a more confident position than it was 10 years ago. It's obviously done extremely well in terms of economic growth, and it's been more assertive on the international stage. I think there's some degree of signaling here. And I think the sense that last time it was giving Trump a big show, giving him a degree of status and a big deal welcome. I think it's not surprising. It sets a tone that this is a more relationship among equals than it was probably last time. That's not to say there are not problems. China has significant economic problems at home. And one of the things that's high on the Chinese agenda at this summit is to avoid a spiraling back into another trade war that would send signals inside China that the economy could get even worse. So it's not as if all the leverage is on the Chinese side, but it is a more confident, more assertive China than was true a decade ago.
And you had said this earlier, really one of the goals here is just to do no harm. All of this has teed up tomorrow's one-on-one between President Trump and Xi Jinping. The president will tour the Great Hall of People, and we saw business leaders Elon Musk, Jensen Huang as part of his delegation. What will be very telling tomorrow as we watch for body language, ceremony, and perhaps statements after the fact?
Well, the big issues will be, of course, what comes out of the meeting, what kind of communique or joint statement we see, and which will record what the deliverables are. Short of that, I mean, you can always try to read body language. I think it's a little tough. My guess is it's going to be still pretty stiff and pretty scripted. And you layer onto that, jet lag and whatever bad things happened in some internal meeting. It's easy to overproject. One of the things that's curious about this summit is, compared to the tradition of U.S.-China summitry, less seems to have been done to lay the groundwork in advance. So one of the reasons for the modest expectations that you're hearing is that usually we would know more if anything large were in place to be announced.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being with us this morning and providing your insight. We really do appreciate it. That's Professor Jacques Delisle, and my thanks to Anna Corin and Remy Inocencio.